Hello beautiful friends, I am here today to share another tutorial with you as part of my scrapbooking tips, tricks and tutorials series. Today I am going to be showing you how I use my Silhouette Studio software and my Cameo machine to create a stitching template or to create stitching holes onto a paper. If you have watched my most recent process video, which is this one here for the Cut to You design team, you will have seen me talking about the stitching that I created for this layout. So on this one, I used an existing cut file from Cut to You, and I used my machine to punch out all of the holes, which allowed me to then go and hand stitch. So I'm trying to get up nice and close here so that you can see just how good or how fine the detail is on that stitching. And I do apologize about the lighting. I'm using some studio lighting, so it's not fantastic. But you can see on this one, I created some really small stitching holes. They were quite close together. So this did take a fair bit of time to hand stitch this layout. So that's how I used it with a cut file. But I have used this technique before to create another stitching template, and this was just to outline the number one, which I had cut from some patterned paper. And if I bring that one up a little bit closer here and hopefully get some decent light for you, you should be able to see that on this one the holes were not quite so close together. They were spaced a little bit more and the holes were also a little bit bigger. So let's pop over to the computer now and have a look and see how I do this in the Silhouette software. Okay, so here we are in my Silhouette Studio software, and I will mention that I am using the designer edition. So if my desktop looks a little bit different to yours, or if there are some features on mine that don't appear on yours, it may just be because of the different editions. So it's worth checking that out. Now, for the purposes of this tutorial and demonstration, I have chosen this cut file here from Cut to You, which I believe is called Spring Floral Edge. If you are going to replicate this kind of technique yourself, just give some consideration to the type of cut file that you're going to be using, and something that's really very intricate probably won't work super well for this technique, but something like this where the design is fairly simple, there's lots of open space between each of the lines, something like this is going to work really, really well. So the first thing that we need to do is to trace our image. So I'm going to come over here to the right, select my trace area, and just go over the top of that whole image, and then I will trace it and just move that image over to the edge there. So now we've got this file here, and if you are familiar with this software, the red lines are indicating where you are going to be cutting. Ordinarily, if you were just going to be cutting this out from some cardstock, you would send this straight off like this and everything would be fantastic. But we don't actually want our silhouette to cut these as lines. We want them to create holes. Now, I do believe there is a tool that you can purchase for the Cameo which punches holes, but I don't have one of those tools. I don't think I would use it enough to make it worthwhile. And since I have found a workaround, I'm quite happy to just stick with using my blade. One thing I will say before I go any further in this tutorial is that depending on how small you cut your stitching lines and how long it goes for, you do want to make sure that after you've done something like this, you clean out your blade, because those tiny little pieces of paper that have been cut out where the holes are can get stuck and cause some dramas the next time you go to cut. So you do want to make sure that you give your blade a little bit of a clean out before you cut something else after you have done something like this. So enough of that little disclaimer. Let's turn this into a stitching file. Just to make it a little bit easy to see, I'm going to come over and I'm going to turn my grid off just so that we can see that file a little bit better. Now I'm going to select the cut, and I'm going to come over here on the right hand side of my panel. I have this dotted star which is called a stipple panel. Now if I hold my button over it, it does tell you that it requires a Silhouette Cameo 3 or a Silhouette Curio, but we have a way around that. So we're going to come along and we are going to check the box here that says stipple edge. And what that has done is it has converted our red cut lines into a stippled edge or a punched edge. And this is where that additional tool would come in. If you had that additional tool, as far as I'm aware, you would then send this off to your Cameo to punch those holes. But since we don't have that tool, and a lot of us don't have that tool, let's get to turning this into a cut file. So if I go to my send panel now, you can see I've got all of these little red dots where my cut lines were. But if I was to send that out to, or try to send that out to my Cameo 4, it wouldn't work. It wouldn't cut, because if we zoom in here, what you're actually going to see is the little red dots here, which is indicating where the punch tool would be cutting those. So that's not going to work to send that to the Cameo with the regular ratchet blade, which is what I use. We'll come back into our design space and we're going to trace it again. So select our trace area, select that whole design, trace, and then I should be able to move. And now we have a cut which has, if we zoom in here, it has just traced around each of those little stipple lines and made them into small dots. And then it's just a matter of sending that off to your Cameo using whatever settings that you have. And that will cut beautifully, and that will cut all of your perfectly spaced, perfectly aligned little stitching holes, which for a perfectionist like me, that is exactly what I want in my designs. I just want to come back here and jump back a few steps and just show you some of the ways that you can adapt this. So when I did that there, I just used the default settings, which is what gave me the spacing and the size of each of those holes. But you can play around with that a little bit. So I'm going to come back to my original design. I'm going to select my trace area, trace it, move it off, select my design again, come back down here to the stipple tool and select the stipple edge. Now I'm going to zoom in a little bit here so that you can see how the changes that I make on this panel change what we're seeing here. One thing that stands out to me when I'm looking at this and the way that the default has set it up is you can see down here in the bottom left of the screen, around here, around the middle of the screen, and over here, we've got some instances where some of those holes are just a little close together. And what that translates to when it's cutting is that you're not going to get too clean holes for each of those. So I'm going to adjust the size and the spacing just a little bit here. So if I come over to this spacing here and I turn this down, what you will see as I continue to reduce that is you will see the holes getting closer and closer and closer together. Alternatively, you can bring the slider up if you want some longer stitches. It's really up to you. You have the flexibility to do what you want there. I'm going to leave that at about 0.8, I think, 0.080 is good for me. The other thing that you can adjust is you can adjust the size of the holes, and that's down here where it says stipple size. It's defaulted to 2.83, but if I bring that down, you're going to see the size of those holes get a little bit smaller. Now, where this is going to have an impact when you send it through to your silhouette, just from the experiences that I've had, is the larger stipple, the larger the stipple, the larger the hole, the easier it is for your ratchet blade to cut through the cardstock. With the smaller holes, it has a much harder time, and the chances of your blade getting clogged up are a little bit higher because those pieces are smaller. So when I created my together layout, I had really small stipple and I had the spacing really close together. And when I pulled it off my machine, I found that even after 2 passes, it still hadn't punched all the way through the cardstock. That was okay because I then used that as a guide with my my awl to go and just poke those holes through properly, and it meant that I had nice evenly spaced nice evenly spaced design. But that is something to be mindful of. If you are using punching smaller holes, you are going to have a harder time getting through to your cardstock, so you may need to just come in with an awl afterwards. But let's just say for the purposes of this, we'll leave our stipple at 1.5, so it's a decent sized hole. And I might actually bring those a little bit closer together. Now you can see we've still got some issues here with, so here and here and here, with some of them that are going to be a little bit too close together. That should be okay. Well, that should be okay when it comes out. So the last step that we need to do now that we've adjusted our file is to come back to the trace tool, select our trace area, trace it, and sorry, my machine's working a little bit slow now. And now we have our stitching template ready to send to the Cameo. So I'll just bring this first one in. So this was using the default, and you can see there this different size of the holes and the different size, the spacing of the holes. The other thing, just as I'm talking, I'm thinking about, you may want to consider the type of thread that you're going to be using when you are stitching or punching these holes with your silhouette. If you are using thicker thread or multiple strands, it may be wise to go for these larger holes. If you're trying for a softer, a smaller thread, then the smaller holes would be better for you. So that is how we create a stitching template using a cut file. Okay, so we'll come over to a new design space now, and I will show you how you can create a stitched border around a design that you've cut from a background. So for the purposes of this demonstration, I am just going to show you how I might create a 2021 title page. I'm going to use my Spellbound font. I'm going to set my size to 400, I think, which is nice and big. Perfect. There's my 2, and then I'm going to copy that, Control-C, and paste it 3 times. And this one, I'm going to change it to a number 1. The 2 stays the same there. And I'm going to change this to a 0. Now, because I am going to be cutting this from a background, or if I was going to be doing it, I would be cutting it from a background, I actually want to remove these internal pieces. So I'm going to right click, release compound path, and then select, right click, ungroup, and then just remove these inside pieces. Okay, so at this point I would send this off to my silhouette to cut this from probably a piece of white cardstock, and that's going to give me the negative space. So the white cardstock will be this all around here, and then these numbers will be cut, and I can pop some pattern paper behind them to fill it in. But I also want to create a stitched border around each of these numbers just to help them stand out on my page a little bit more. The technique is very similar to what we've just done with the cut file, but what we need to do first of all is we need to create an offset. So I'm going to select each of these numbers, and to do this I'm just holding down my shift key as I'm selecting each object. Then I'm going to come over here on the right to the offset panel. I'm going to give it an offset, And I actually am really happy with that spacing. I think that 0.125 is the perfect space. It's not going to be too close to the edge of the cut so that my stitches will fall in or the paper will tear, but it's really going to help to give some definition. So I'll go ahead and apply that. And now if I was to send this to my Cameo as it is, I would have double cut. So I would end up with an outline of the number 2, and then this would be a separate piece, and then I'd have my background. So what I want to do now is to come in and select each of those offset pieces that I've just created. Come back to my stipple panel over here, select stipple edge. I am going to actually keep it at the default there. I'm just going to leave it like that. I'm quite happy with the size and the spacing. And then, as we know, once we've done that, we need to come back in and we need to select our trace area because we need to trace over the top of those stipple points. And we can trace it. Oh, I don't want to do that. Okay, that's fine, we can leave that there. But if I'm to send that to my Cameo now, I am going to have it cut each of those little inside pieces here, as well as cutting all of my perfectly aligned, perfectly spaced stitching holes. That's it for this tutorial. It is, I think, quite straightforward, but if there's anything at all that you're unsure of, any little extra bits of advice or information that you would like, please feel free to leave me a comment and I will get back to you. I hope you have enjoyed this tutorial. I hope that it has been helpful. If you are new to my channel, I would love for you to go ahead and hit that subscribe button and to join me and my little community as we scrap our way through 2021. If you have enjoyed this, please go ahead and give me a thumbs up, or of course, if there's anything that you think I can improve on, this is a new series. This is something that's quite new to me, and I'm very, very open to any feedback that you have to offer. Please go ahead and leave me a comment and I will take everything that I receive on board. I cannot wait to see what wonderful creations you come up with using this new technique, and I do hope you will tag me in social media if you are creating something using this technique. I am on Instagram and my username is Misspelled Jane. You'll find a link to that in the description box below. So that's about it. Thank you so much for watching as always, and I hope you have a great day.